My daughter once told me I'd never be anything better and despised me to the extent that she never introduced me to her husband. One day, her husband's new boss invited them to dinner. When they arrived, I was sitting at the head table. He smiled and said, "Meet my mentor." Her jaw dropped. Want to know how this story ended? Stick till the end to find out. First, like, share and subscribe to this channel to show us some love. Kindly share with us where you're watching us from in the comments section. Now let me tell you how everything unfolded. My name is Thomas, and I've lived most of my life somewhere in the quiet corners of other people's priorities. I was the kind of man who paid the mortgage before anyone asked, kept the fridge full, and replaced the oil in my daughter's car before she even noticed the sticker on the windshield was faded. But somewhere between my silent support and her growing independence, I faded into the background. I worked in logistics, nothing flashy, nothing that would turn heads at a dinner party. I didn't wear designer suits or take business calls over steak. I got packages delivered on time, managed teams across states, and built a reputation as the man who could solve impossible problems with a spreadsheet and a stubborn kind of optimism. I never needed applause. I never needed recognition. But what I didn't expect, what I didn't know would slice deeper than any layoff or health scare. In that quiet stretch of time, I didn't chase her. I didn't beg for a place at her table. I turned inward, not in bitterness, but in resolve. My work had always been solid, but now I poured into it. I took consulting gigs on the side. I started mentoring younger professionals, men and women who reminded me of my younger self, hungry for stability and purpose more than prestige. I taught them how to lead without shouting, how to manage without fear. One of those young men, Marcus, rose faster than I expected. Sharp, respectful, and eager to learn. He soaked up everything I offered, and when he landed a director role in a company I'd once helped restructure, he asked me to stay on as an informal advisor. He called me his mentor. He told people I changed the way he thought about leadership. I never broadcasted it. That wasn't my style. But the irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter once said I'd never be anything more. And yet, there I was, changing futures quietly from behind the scenes. I remember sitting alone one night, pouring a scotch and flipping through a photo album I hadn't touched in years. There was a picture of her on her 5th birthday, frosting smeared across her cheeks, a paper crown slipping off her head. I had built that crown myself the night before, using cardstock and glitter she picked out at the store. I remembered how she squealed when she saw it, hugged me tight, told me I was the best dad in the world. And for a long time, I believed I was. That moment, years before she learned to see the world in terms of status and success, was the last time I remember her looking at me like I was someone to be proud of. That memory haunted me more than her actual words, because it reminded me that something changed in her, and I hadn't noticed when. There's something cruel about realizing your child has outgrown the version of you they once adored. It's not just about rejection, it's about invisibility. You start to question everything. Did I work too much? Was I too boring? Should I have tried harder to impress her? But deep down, I knew the answer wasn't in the things I did or didn't do. The world had taught her to value certain things: wealth, charisma, image. And in that world, I didn't register. I wasn't shiny enough. I wasn't loud enough. I wasn't the kind of man she wanted to introduce to the people she was trying to impress. I had become an inconvenience in the story she was trying to tell about herself. And yet, despite it all, I didn't stop loving her. That was the cruelest part of all. I didn't stop checking her social media from time to time, even if I wasn't her friend. I didn't stop wondering how she was doing. I didn't stop wishing her well on birthdays, even if I never sent a message. And every so often, when I saw someone in the street who looked a bit like her, I'd feel a quick rush of hope that maybe she was about to turn around and call out to me. She never did. Of course not. But I kept on living. I kept mentoring. I kept building. Because while she may not have seen me, other people did. People like Marcus. People who invited me to the table, not because of my last name or my social standing, but because of what I brought with me. Integrity, experience, quiet power. And that, I told myself, would have to be enough. I found out she was married through a tagged photo on someone else's timeline. The algorithm did me a favor that day. Ironic, considering how many times I'd clicked on her profile only to be met with the same bland banner and profile picture. always professional, always distant. But this time, there she was in a white dress, smiling next to a man whose name I didn't know, under a floral archway that I hadn't helped build. There was no father-daughter dance, no toast, no moment where I got to straighten her veil or cry as I gave her away. Just a caption from someone else, congratulating the happy couple. I stared at the photo longer than I'd admit. Not because I was angry, at least, not at first, but because I didn't recognize her anymore. She looked so polished, so curated, like a stranger who vaguely resembled someone I used to raise. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it had been a small ceremony. Maybe there were complications. But then more photos surfaced, more posts from friends and family members I hadn't heard from in years. The truth was unavoidable. She had simply excluded me. Not forgotten. Chosen. That distinction mattered. Forgetting implies an accident. Exclusion is an intent. She had decided, perhaps with a shrug or a well-practiced excuse, that I didn't belong at her table anymore. And what cut deeper than the wedding itself was the fact that no one, not a single soul, reached out to say, "Hey, I think she's making a mistake." They all went along with it. That silence was its own kind of betrayal. One that wrapped itself around my chest like a cold hand and squeezed just enough to remind me it was still there. I kept working. I kept my head down. But inside, a shift had started. I began pulling back from the few mutual connections we had. I stopped replying to birthday texts from people who had stood at her side while I stood nowhere. I declined holiday invites where she might appear. It wasn't spite, it was preservation. I didn't have the energy to keep pretending that nothing had changed, that I hadn't been quietly disowned. So I doubled down on what I could control, my legacy, my work, my ments. Marcus had just taken a job at a fast-growing logistics firm that reminded me of my early days. He called often, asking for advice, venting about boardroom politics, sharing successes. And I gave him everything I had, not because I wanted a replacement for my daughter, but because I refused to let the bitterness consume me. Marcus reminded me of the man I used to be, earnest, a little rough around the edges, but willing to listen. And he listened. He implemented my ideas, even gave me credit in meetings. That validation, quiet and genuine, was a balm. Eventually, he became someone of note in the industry. He climbed the ladder fast, and with each step, he made sure to pull others up behind him. One day, out of the blue, he called me. "Hey, old man," he joked. "I've got a new gig. Bigger role. More headaches. But I finally get to build my own team." I congratulated him, sincerely. Then he said something that stuck. "I owe it to you, you know. Everything I've built, it started with you." I sat with that for a moment. Let it sink in. Because as much as I told myself I didn't need recognition, that one sentence unraveled something I hadn't realized I'd been holding together with twine and silence. Later that week, he asked if I'd be willing to attend a private dinner. "It's mostly execs and their spouses," he explained. "I just want them to meet the guy who taught me how to lead." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I didn't want to hope. The idea of sitting at a table where I was genuinely valued was foreign after years of being shut out. But I agreed. Not for revenge. Not even for pride. Just to see what it felt like to be seen. Really seen. What I didn't know, what would shake the axis of that quiet little world I'd built, was that her husband had just taken a new job too. And he was now reporting directly to Marcus. Life has a strange way of circling back. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes with a crashing wave. And this wave hadn't even hit yet. But I could feel the tide pulling. The dinner was set for a Saturday evening in early spring. Just warm enough to justify an outdoor patio, but still cool enough to keep a few space heaters humming in the corners. Marcus had reserved a private dining space at a trendy, upscale restaurant known for its wood-fired menu and dim lighting. The kind of place where every wine bottle came with a backstory and the servers addressed you by your last name. I arrived 10 minutes early, out of habit. I never liked being rushed, especially not at events where appearances mattered. Marcus greeted me like I was family, arms wide, grin huge, and immediately handed me a glass of bourbon. "You're the man of the hour," he said. "Everyone's been asking about you." I smiled politely. I never knew what to do with praise, but I appreciated the sentiment. What I didn't know yet, what I hadn't even begun to suspect, was that my daughter's husband was among the guests. The introductions began the way they always did in rooms like that. Small clusters of polished professionals making safe jokes, offering handshakes that bordered on competitive. Marcus went around the table, pulling me into conversations, lifting me up in front of executives and their partners like I was some kind of quiet legend. This guy, he'd say, taught me everything. If you like the way I lead, it's because of him. I'd nod, offer a brief anecdote, usually laced with humility. But then I noticed a young couple being seated at the far end of the table. The man had the kind of energy I recognized instantly, newly promoted, ambitious, just a touch too eager to laugh at the right moments. His wife followed behind him, distracted, half-focused on something in her clutch. Then she looked up. Our eyes locked. And just like that, the air in the room changed. She froze mid-step, her face draining of color so fast I thought she might faint. Her husband hadn't noticed. He was too busy greeting Marcus, thanking him again for the opportunity. Marcus, oblivious to the tension between me and the woman now clutching her purse like it was a lifeline, clapped the man on the back and gestured toward me. And this, he said with the pride of a younger brother showing off his hero, this is Thomas, my mentor. The reason I'm even here today. Her husband turned to me with a wide smile, extended his hand. It's an honor, he said. I've heard so much about you. I shook his hand, firm and polite. I could feel her watching us, her lips slightly parted, 1,000 thoughts crashing behind her eyes. She looked like she had seen a ghost, and in some ways, maybe she had. Because the man standing in front of her wasn't the quiet, background character she'd pushed aside all those years ago. I wasn't just dad anymore. I was someone her world now respected. And she had no idea. She tried to speak as we all took our seats, leaned slightly toward me, and whispered, Dad. But I didn't turn. I kept my attention on the conversation flowing across the table, accepting a refill of bourbon and nodding along as someone recounted a supply chain nightmare I'd once solved in a single weekend. She said my name again, a little louder this time, like she was trying to drag us both back into the past. I still didn't answer. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't angry. I just didn't have anything left to give her in that moment. She had made her choices, and now she would have to sit with them, just like I had. Throughout the evening, I saw her shift in her chair, trying to figure out the right moment to cut through the noise and reach me. But each time she made a move, I was in the middle of a conversation or offering advice or laughing with someone who actually wanted me there. It must have been jarring for her to watch people admire me, listen to me, treat me like a man of substance. Maybe she expected me to still be that quiet, invisible father, reliable but unremarkable. But I had changed. Not for her. For myself. For the people who saw value in what I brought to the table. At one point, her husband leaned over and said, I had no idea you were her father. She never mentioned you. I smiled, still looking at my glass. She tends to leave out parts of her story. I replied, calm and even. He seemed confused, as though trying to reconcile the man everyone in the room was praising with a version of me he'd apparently never been told about. I didn't blame him. He seemed decent, if not a bit naive to the full weight of the situation. I could feel her eyes burning into me, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of acknowledgement. I had given enough. Now, it was her turn to sit in silence. The dinner moved forward. Speeches were made, toasts were offered, and I spoke briefly, thanking Marcus, reflecting on the joy of mentorship, on the satisfaction of watching someone rise because they had the right kind of foundation. I didn't mention her once, not even indirectly. She was a ghost in the room, haunting no one but herself. When dessert was served, she excused herself to the restroom and didn't come back for 20 minutes. When she did, her eyes were red, though her makeup tried to cover it. Still, I stayed in my lane, because nothing she could say in that moment would rewrite the years she left me out of her life. As the night wound down, she finally approached me when most guests had begun to gather their coats. Dad, she said, quiet and tentative. Can we talk? I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time all night. And what I saw wasn't a confident woman who had everything figured out. It was a daughter who had realized too late that she didn't know her own father at all. You said I'd never be anything better, I replied, keeping my voice low but steady. So I stopped trying to prove anything to you. Then I stepped past her, thanked Marcus once more for the invitation, and left. Outside, the air was cooler than I remembered. I pulled my coat tighter, walked toward my car with a strange mix of peace and pain in my chest. This was what accountability looked like. Not revenge, not anger, just clarity. She'd drawn the lines years ago. I had simply stopped erasing them. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was rattled, but because the silence afterward carried a strange kind of weight. I kept replaying the look in her eyes when I walked past her. The shock, the regret, the uncertainty, all tangled together in that split-second expression. It stayed with me like a pulse under my skin. It wasn't triumph I felt. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something far more sobering. Because underneath the composed exterior I wore like armor that night, there was still a father who had once rearranged his entire world around a little girl who used to think he was a giant. And now, that little girl had grown into a woman who had rewritten her life to exclude me. That contradiction hurt more than I wanted to admit. Not because I needed her approval, but because once, a long time ago, I had mattered to her in a way no one else did. And somehow, all that had been lost in the noise of status and appearances. The next morning, I opened my inbox to find an email from her. No subject line, just 2 sentences, sitting quietly between other unread messages. I didn't know. I'm sorry. Can we meet? I stared at it for a long time. I didn't know what to feel. I had waited years for something like this. Some sign that she remembered me as more than an obligation. And now that it was here, all I felt was hesitation. When someone chooses to walk out of your life, you mourn them in real time. You adapt. You shift. You build walls not to keep them out, but to keep yourself from shattering again if they ever come back. And when they finally do, when they knock with soft apologies and eyes full of regret, you don't just throw the door open. At least, I couldn't. I didn't respond immediately. I went about my day with that message tucked in the back of my mind like a splinter. I sat in on a budget review with Marcus. I met an old friend for lunch. I even stopped by the hardware store to replace a light bulb for my front porch. But every moment felt heavier, like I was moving through molasses. That email echoed behind every conversation, every nod, every bite of my sandwich. I thought about all the ways our lives had diverged. About the weddings and birthdays and milestones that happened without a phone call. About the picture frames in my study that still held her school photos, even when the space between us had become more permanent than I cared to admit. That evening, I finally wrote her back. Friday, noon, Red Elm Coffee House. It was a quiet spot tucked between an antique store and a florist, the kind of place where time slowed down. I chose it deliberately, not a place full of noise or performance, but somewhere real. I arrived 15 minutes early, because that's what I've always done. I sat by the window with a black coffee, watching people pass by. And then I saw her. She walked toward the building in that stiff, nervous way people do when they're bracing for a conversation they're not sure they're ready to have. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. She approached with a tentative smile and a quiet, "Hi." She looked older than the last time I saw her, not in a worn-out way, but in the way people do when they've lived too long with a closed heart. Still polished, still well put together, but something softer sat behind her eyes now. She pulled out the chair across from me and Saturday. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, voice low. I nodded. There was no warmth in my response, but no coldness either. I was neutral, guarded. She started talking before I could. "I didn't know you were involved in Marcus's company," she said. "I didn't even know you were still working like that. I guess I assumed you were still in the same job as before." She looked embarrassed, but it didn't stop her. "I didn't realize how respected you were." I stirred my coffee slowly. "That's the problem. You didn't realize because you never looked." My voice was calm, but I knew it landed. She flinched slightly and nodded, biting her lip. "You're right. I didn't look. I didn't ask. She paused, searching for the right word. "I wanted to create a new life, and I thought it would be easier to start fresh if I didn't bring my past with me." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. "You say past like I was a phase." "Is it about the dinner?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. He leaned back, thoughtful. "I didn't know she was your daughter until after." If I'd known, I waved him off. "It's not on you, Marcus. You brought me into that room because you respect me, and that's more than I can say for most." He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You deserve more than respect. You deserve to be seen, not just in boardrooms, in your own damn family." Those words hit me harder than I expected, because that was it, wasn't it? Being seen, not for what I could do, not for the problems I could solve, but for who I was. For years, I had been invisible to the person I once loved most in this world. And now that she was trying to see me again, I didn't know if I could stand in that spotlight without flinching. I had built my identity in the shadows, quietly, purposefully, and I wasn't sure I knew how to be open anymore. That night, I wrote her a letter. Not an email, not a text, a real letter, pen on paper. I told her about how I used to wait for her calls, about the nights I'd stare at old pictures wondering what I'd done wrong. I told her how her words, that I'd never be anything more, had sat with me for years, not because I believed them, but because they came from her. I told her I forgave her, but forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant setting myself free from the weight of resentment. I told her I wasn't ready for Sunday dinners or holidays, but I was open to conversations, to slow steps forward, if she was willing to walk at my pace. I sealed the envelope, wrote her name on the front, and mailed it the next morning. No tracking number, no expectation, just a gesture, something real, something grounded. Because rebuilding isn't a grand gesture. It's a quiet, deliberate act, done again and again until the silence turns into something solid. There was no dramatic reunion, no tearful embrace in the middle of a bustling street, no Facebook announcement that we had reconnected. Just time, quiet, patient time. That's what healing looks like when it's real. Not a flood, but a slow thaw. After I sent that letter, she didn't respond for a week. Then another. I figured maybe she read it and didn't know what to say, or maybe she wasn't ready to meet me where I was. Either way, I had made peace with the silence. I hadn't written it expecting a reply. I'd written it because I needed her to know how deep the hurt went and how hard I'd fought not to let it define me. I had nothing left to prove. Not to her. Not to anyone. I had built something without applause. I had lived without acknowledgement. But something about telling my truth, finally, had unknotted something inside me. I didn't realize how much I had still been carrying until I set it down. 3 weeks later, I received a call. Not a voicemail. Not a text. A real call. I nearly didn't pick it up. I was standing in my kitchen, pouring coffee into a travel mug, already halfway out the door. I wasn't interested in resurrecting a ghost of our former relationship. I wanted something authentic. Something honest. Even if it was smaller. Even if it never looked like what we used to have. I'd rather have half the truth than a whole lie. The real shift came one afternoon when I got a call from Marcus. He sounded amused. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "We're doing an employee spotlight video series. Just some internal stuff. Your daughter's husband is in the next one." I didn't say anything, just waited. He told the whole crew that the biggest influence on his leadership philosophy was something his mentor's mentor taught him. He laughed. "So, basically, you're the grandfather of this company's culture, whether you want to be or not." I chuckled softly. Funny how things work out. But later that night, as I sat in my chair watching the sun disappear behind the neighbor's roof, I thought about the irony of it all. The man she once didn't want me to meet now unknowingly carried my influence into every meeting, every decision. My name had been spoken in rooms I was never invited into. And that, in its own strange way, felt like justice. A few weeks after that, she invited me to a gathering, just a small one. Her husband had gotten a promotion, and they were hosting a quiet dinner with a few colleagues. She asked gently, with no pressure, if I'd like to come. "I'd understand if you said no," she added. I said I'd think about it. And I did. For days. I weighed the cost, not of attending, but of what I would be to her in that room. Would I be an obligation? A statement? A shadow? But then I remembered something my therapist once said. Sometimes the boundary isn't about pushing people away, it's about showing up on your terms. So I agreed. Not because I wanted to make peace with her world, but because I wanted to see if she was willing to make space in it for the whole of me, not just the parts that were now publicly acceptable. The night of the dinner, I wore the same jacket I wore to Marcus's event. Familiar. Sturdy. I walked into their home, and immediately I noticed something that made my throat catch. On the hallway wall, Among the framed photos of her husband's family, their travels, and a few candid shots, was a picture of me and her. From years ago, a candid I didn't even know she still had. Me in a flannel shirt, her on my shoulders at a fall festival. She had that same open-mouthed laugh she used to have before the world convinced her that joy had to be polished. She noticed me noticing and simply said, "That's my favorite." It was the first time in years I'd felt like a father in her house. As the night went on, her husband introduced me to one of his colleagues with an easy, casual comment. "This is my wife's father, Thomas." There it was, said aloud. No hesitation, no revision, no avoidance, just a name, a connection, spoken like it belonged. And she didn't flinch, didn't look away. She stood beside me, proud. Maybe not of the man I had become, but finally, of the man I had always been. And that, more than anything, told me she was trying. Really trying. Some people wait a lifetime to be seen by their own family. I stopped waiting. I built a life without applause, found peace without permission, and set boundaries where there once was begging. When my daughter finally looked back, I didn't rush to meet her. I stood still and let her walk toward me on her own. And now, we're not what we once were, but we're something honest. And sometimes, that's enough. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself after being left behind, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, pain, and the power of choosing your own worth. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever had to hold your boundaries with someone you loved? See you soon in the next story.